That morning, my Ford F-150 was gone. So was every dollar I'd spent 43 years saving. Then my phone rang. My daughter laughed before she even said hello. Dad, I finally have my own life. I took everything. The house is sold. Good luck. I looked into my empty garage, took a slow breath, and answered with one word. Okay. At 67, my mornings don't begin with an alarm anymore. They begin with my knees. Most days, the left one complains first. Then the right joins in, like it doesn't want to be left out. I sat on the edge of the bed until the ache settled into something I could work with. That's been my routine ever since I retired from the Caterpillar shop in Springfield, almost 5 years ago. I shuffled into the kitchen, filled the old drip coffee maker, and reached for the blue ceramic mug my wife Linda bought me during a weekend trip to Branson back in 1993. The handle had a tiny crack running through it. So did most things worth keeping. While the coffee brewed, I stepped onto the back porch with a coffee can full of birdseed. Cardinals always gathered near the maple tree just after sunrise. Linda loved watching them. "Morning, sweetheart," I said quietly toward the empty chair beside mine. I still did that. Old habits don't disappear just because people do. By 6:30, coffee was ready. I took one slow sip, grabbed my keys, and headed toward the garage. I planned to drive over to Carter's Farm Supply and pick up fertilizer before the heat settled over Springfield. I pressed the garage door opener. The door rattled upward. Cool morning air rolled inside. I frowned. The space where my truck always sat was empty. For a second, my brain refused to catch up. I actually looked to the left, then to the right, as if somehow a full-size pickup had hidden itself behind lawn tools. Nothing. Just the dark oil stain on the concrete where the truck had rested for nearly 12 years. My coffee mug slipped a little in my hand. That's strange. I walked farther inside. The spare keys hanging beside the workbench were gone. So was the garage remote. I suddenly remembered something. The file cabinet. I hurried back inside faster than my knees appreciated. The bottom drawer was open. Every folder that mattered had disappeared. Truck title, insurance papers, tax records, even my passport. The old laptop I'd kept on the dining room table was gone too. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. Not panic, not yet, something heavier. My phone vibrated. Melissa. I answered immediately. Everything okay? She laughed. Actually laughed. You found it already? My throat tightened. Found what? The empty garage. Silence. Then she sighed dramatically. Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be. What are you talking about? I have a new life now. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What does that mean? It means I'm done. Her voice sounded lighter than I'd heard in years. No more taking care of an old man. No more putting my life on hold. You weren't taking care of me. Oh, come on, she laughed again. I handled your bills, your appointments, your banking. I practically ran your whole life. You offered. Because someone had to. I closed my eyes. Outside, I could hear a lawnmower starting somewhere down the street. Everything else in the neighborhood carried on like any ordinary Thursday morning. My world had quietly stopped. What did you do, Melissa? I sold the house. I didn't answer. I transferred the money. Still nothing. I took the truck. The words landed one at a time, each one heavier than the last. You what? You heard me. That house isn't yours. It practically is. No, it should have been years ago. I rubbed my forehead. Where are you? Far enough away. Are you with Jason? She didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Finally, she said, we're leaving Missouri. For where? It doesn't matter. You really think this ends well? I think I deserve something after wasting 10 years taking care of you. I almost corrected her. Almost reminded her who paid every electric bill after each divorce. Who covered the credit cards. Who paid the lawyer after her second marriage ended. Who let her move back home 3 different times. Instead, I asked quietly, did you ever once feel grateful? She scoffed. You always make yourself the victim. I asked you a question. I don't have time for this. A man's voice sounded faintly in the background. Jason. He said something I couldn't make out. Melissa laughed. Then she spoke into the phone one last time. You'll figure something out. Click. The line went dead. I stayed exactly where I was. Coffee cooling beside me. Hands resting on the counter. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe 30. Eventually, I carried my mug out to the porch and sat in Linda's old chair instead of mine. The birds had already finished eating. The yard felt strangely quiet. I thought about Melissa at 5 years old chasing fireflies until she tripped over her own feet. I thought about the night her first husband admitted he'd been cheating. She showed up at my door after midnight, still wearing her wedding ring. Daddy, she'd whispered through tears. I opened the door without asking a single question. The second divorce came 4 years later. Different man, different excuse. Same porch, same hug. The third marriage lasted less than 2 years. Jason hadn't come into the picture yet. She stood in this very yard with 2 suitcases. I don't know where else to go. You know where your room is? I never hesitated. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I spent so much time helping her survive that I never taught her how to stand on her own. At 8 o'clock sharp, I finally reached into my pocket and found my phone. There were only 2 people I trusted enough to call. One of them had been buried 11 years ago. So I called the other. Frank answered on the second ring. You usually don't call this early. My truck's gone. Silence. My accounts are empty. Another pause. Then I said the words I still couldn't quite believe. Melissa says she sold my house. Frank didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, he asked one calm question. You still have everything? I looked toward the basement door. I think so. Go check. I made my way downstairs. The old gun safe sat behind a shelf full of paint cans. My fingers hesitated on the combination dial. I hadn't opened it in years. The heavy steel door creaked open. Inside sat one thick yellow envelope. Across the front in Linda's handwriting were 6 words. If Melissa ever tries again. I picked it up carefully. My chest tightened. I found it, I whispered into the phone. Frank let out a long breath. I was hoping we'd never need that envelope. So was I. For the first time since the garage door rolled open that morning, I realized I wasn't completely helpless. Maybe Linda had seen something in our daughter long before I was willing to admit it. Maybe she'd also known that one day, love wouldn't be enough. Frank was at my house in less than 20 minutes. He drove the same faded green Chevy Silverado he'd owned since before either of us retired. The driver's door still squeaked when he climbed out. He didn't waste time asking how I felt. He'd spent 32 years as a county detective. He knew emotions could wait, evidence couldn't. He stepped into the kitchen, glanced at my untouched coffee, then at my face. You sleep at all last night? I slept fine. You look like hell. I've looked like hell for 10 years. That earned the smallest smile. Fair enough. We carried the yellow envelope upstairs and spread everything across the dining room table. Linda always called that table the family courtroom. Every major decision in our house had been made there. Vacation plans, college applications, hospital paperwork. Even Melissa's first bicycle had been assembled right beside it. Now the same table held documents I prayed I'd never have to use. Frank carefully opened the envelope. Inside were certified copies of property records, bank authorizations, a thick binder from an estate attorney, several notarized letters, a small USB drive taped inside the cover. He nodded. You kept it exactly like we talked about. I almost threw it away last year. I'm glad you didn't. I lowered myself into a chair. You really thought she'd do something like this? Frank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up one photograph tucked between the papers. It showed Melissa at around 12 years old smiling beside Linda after winning her middle school science fair. He looked at it for a moment before setting it back down. No, he said quietly. I hoped I was wrong. I stared at the photograph. So did I. 7 years earlier, life had looked very different. Linda had already been gone 4 years. Melissa had just ended her third marriage. She arrived carrying 2 suitcases and a cardboard box filled with framed family photos. She looked exhausted. I don't have anywhere else to go. You've always got somewhere to go, she cried. I hugged her. 3 days later, she started helping around the house. She organized my medications, balanced my checkbook, created online accounts for utilities because I still preferred mailing checks. You shouldn't have to deal with all this internet stuff, she'd tell me. I appreciated it. Truth be told, I was never comfortable with online banking. To me, money belonged on paper. Receipts, statements, canceled checks. Melissa said I was living in 1995. Maybe I was. Then came the phone call. A loan officer from a local credit union asked why I hadn't made the first payment on a $28,000 personal loan. I thought it was a scam. I never applied for a loan. The woman became quiet. Mr. Dawson, we have your signed application. I drove there immediately. When she placed the paperwork in front of me, my stomach turned. The signature looked almost perfect. Almost. I knew my own handwriting. That wasn't mine. The surveillance video showed Melissa dropping off the paperwork. She admitted everything before I even finished asking questions. I was going to pay it back. With what? I just needed a little time. You forged my signature. I was desperate. She cried so hard she could barely breathe. I didn't think you'd help me again. That sentence hurt more than the forgery. Because she was wrong. I would have helped. I always had. Frank wanted me to press charges. You let this go? He'd warned me, and she'll think she got away with it. I can't send my own daughter to jail. You wouldn't be sending her. Frank. Harry. I can't. In the end, I paid the loan. Melissa promised it would never happen again. Frank didn't argue anymore. Instead, he drove me to an attorney's office 2 weeks later. The attorney's name was Margaret Ellis. Gray hair, sharp eyes. She listened more than she talked. After reviewing everything, she folded her hands. Mr. Dawson, I'm not here to tell you your daughter is a bad person. I appreciate that, but I'm going to tell you something you probably don't want to hear. I nodded. Your greatest financial risk isn't a stranger. She looked directly at me. It's someone who already has your trust. That sentence stayed with me. She explained something called an irrevocable living trust. At first, I hated the idea. It sounds like I'm hiding my own property. No, she said gently. You're protecting it. For who? For yourself? And after I'm gone, she smiled. That's your decision. Over the next month, we transferred the house into the trust. Not because I wanted to cut Melissa out. Quite the opposite. I wanted to make sure no one, including Melissa, could accidentally or intentionally lose it before I was gone. Margaret recommended an independent trustee. Not a family member. Not a friend. A licensed professional whose only job was following the trust documents. She also convinced me to keep certified copies in several places. Her office, the county recorder, my fireproof safe, a digital backup, one sealed envelope with Frank. If anyone ever questions ownership, she said, there should be no single point of failure. At the time, it all felt excessive. I almost laughed. Who would ever go through this much trouble? Margaret looked at me kindly. People who never imagined they'd need it. Frank slid the binder toward me. You remember what else she recommended? I nodded. Separate passwords and two-factor authentication. And I ignored that one. He sighed. I know. I figured Melissa handled all that. Frank rubbed his forehead. That's exactly why we're here. The front doorbell rang. Neither of us had invited anyone. Frank walked to the window. Unmarked sedan. A woman stepped onto the porch carrying a leather portfolio. She wasn't wearing a uniform, just business clothes. Frank opened the door. You must be Detective Kim. She extended her hand. Rachel Kim, Financial Crimes Division. She shook my hand firmly. Mr. Dawson, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I invited her inside. She didn't sit immediately. Instead, she looked carefully around the room. Family photographs. Linda's quilt folded over the couch. The old grandfather clock in the corner. Nothing escaped her attention. Finally, she sat across from me. I've already spoken with your bank. My heart sank. They believed the transfers were authorized through your online account. I didn't authorize anything. I know. She opened her folder. The good news is, she paused. Someone made several mistakes. Frank leaned forward. What kind of mistakes? The property transfer submitted yesterday doesn't match county ownership records. She slid one paper toward us. The electronic notary seal doesn't exist. Another page. The digital signature certificate failed authentication. Another. And this. She tapped the final document. Isn't even the correct version of a Missouri durable power of attorney. Frank raised an eyebrow. So whoever did this downloaded a fake form. Or an outdated one, Rachel nodded. Either way, it doesn't hold up. For the first time that morning, I felt something besides grief. Not hope exactly, but certainty. Melissa hadn't gotten away with it. Rachel looked directly at me. Mr. Dawson? Yes. This isn't simply a disagreement between family members anymore. She closed the folder. We're investigating identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The room became very quiet. Outside, a pickup rolled slowly past the house. Life on our street continued like any other Tuesday. Inside my kitchen, everything had changed. For the next 3 days, my phone never rang. Not once. No apology. No explanation. No angry message. Nothing. I kept checking it anyway. Old fathers do foolish things. We tell ourselves we're checking the weather or looking for the time when what we're really hoping for is one missed call from someone who used to need us. Every night before bed, I'd set my phone on the nightstand screen facing up. Every morning, it was still blank. The following Monday, I had physical therapy at Cox Health. My knees had been getting worse since winter, and my doctor insisted I stop pretending I was still 50. The waiting room smelled like coffee and disinfectant. A television mounted in the corner played a daytime talk show that nobody was watching. I signed in, nodded to the receptionist, and took my usual seat by the window. An older man across from me recognized me. Didn't you used to work over at Caterpillar? I smiled politely. 43 years. I thought so. He grinned. You fixed my loader once back in 2009. I probably complained about it. You definitely did. For a second, we both laughed. It felt strange. Like my body remembered how before my mind did. A therapist named Emily came out carrying a clipboard. Mr. Dawson. That's me. She led me into the exercise room. Same routine as always. Stretching, balance work, step platform, resistance bands. About halfway through the session, she noticed I wasn't paying attention. "You okay today?" "I'm trying to be." She waited. Good therapists know silence usually tells the truth faster than questions. Finally, she asked gently, "You have family nearby?" I nodded. "A daughter. Does she help you out much?" The words caught somewhere behind my ribs. I looked down at my knees while tightening the resistance band. "I have a daughter." Emily didn't rush to fill the silence. "I just don't know if I still have a family." She quietly squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sorry." "So am I." When I got home, Frank's truck was already in the driveway. He was sitting on my porch with 2 sandwiches from Schlotsky's. "Turkey, you know me." He handed me one. "I figured you forgot lunch." "I did." "You've forgotten 3 meals in 4 days." "You counting?" "Someone has to." We ate without talking for several minutes. The cicadas were loud enough to fill the quiet. Finally, Frank reached into his jacket pocket and handed me several printed pages. "What am I looking at?" "Melissa's public Facebook." I frowned. "I don't want to see that." "I think you need to." I sighed and took the pages. The first picture showed Melissa standing beside a swimming pool somewhere in Florida. She wore sunglasses I'd never seen before. Jason stood behind her with one arm around her waist. Both of them were smiling. The caption read, "Finally free, new beginnings, no regrets." The second picture showed expensive furniture being delivered to an apartment. The third, a brand new designer handbag. I stared at it for a long time. Not because of the handbag, because Linda had carried the same leather purse for almost 20 years. The zipper barely worked near the end. She refused to replace it because, as she'd always say, if something still does its job, why throw it away? Funny how 2 people can grow up in the same house and learn completely different lessons. Frank took another bite of his sandwich. "You mad?" I shook my head. "No, lying a little." "What are you really feeling?" I folded the papers carefully. "Tired." He nodded. "That I believe." 2 days later, Detective Rachel Kim called. "Mr. Dawson, do you have a few minutes?" "I do. I wanted to give you an update." I grabbed a notebook from the kitchen drawer. "Go ahead." "We've confirmed the property transfer was rejected by the county recorder." I closed my eyes. "So the house was never legally sold." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "What about the money?" "Some of it has already been frozen. Some large electronic transfers automatically triggered additional review." Meaning whoever initiated them moved too fast. That sounded like Jason, always impatient. Rachel continued. "We also requested transaction records from several financial institutions." "Did you find anything?" "We found quite a bit." Her tone changed. Less conversational, more professional. "Mr. Dawson, does the name Jason Walker appear on any of your financial accounts?" "No." "That's what we expected." She paused. "But his office computer appears in several login records." I frowned. "How's that possible?" "We believe your daughter gave him access." My stomach tightened. "Or," Rachel continued, "he convinced her to." About a week later, Rachel invited me to the financial crimes office. The building wasn't impressive. Just another government office with beige walls and faded carpet. She greeted me with a paper cup of coffee. "Black, right? You remembered." "I try." She led me into a conference room. A large monitor displayed a timeline. Dates, times, bank transfers, phone locations, property filings. Everything connected with colored lines. Rachel pointed toward one section. "This is where things become interesting." She enlarged a cluster of transactions. "See these?" I nodded. "They all happened within 3 hours." "Too fast. Much too fast." She clicked again. Another screen appeared. "We also subpoenaed cloud backups." "You can do that." "With a warrant." "What did you find?" Rachel turned the monitor toward me. Text messages. Hundreds of them. Most were between Melissa and Jason. I didn't want to read them, but one message caught my eye. "Melissa, do we really have to move this fast?" Jason replied less than a minute later. "Jason, the old man will figure it out if we wait." Another message. "Melissa, are you sure this is legal?" Jason, "Stop asking questions." I stared at the screen. My daughter wasn't innocent. Not even close. She'd chosen this. But something had shifted. She wasn't leading. She was following. Rachel folded her hands. "There's more." She opened another file. "We've linked Jason Walker to 3 previous investigations involving elderly victims." My heart sank. 3. One in Oklahoma. She flipped a page. One in Kansas. Another. And one in Arkansas. "What happened?" "Different methods." She looked directly at me. Same pattern. Older person. New romantic relationship, sudden financial activity, large transfers, disappearing assets. I felt sick. So Melissa may have believed she was helping him. Rachel nodded. Or believed they were partners. And Rachel's expression softened. I'm beginning to think she was being manipulated too. I rubbed both hands over my face. Part of me wanted to hate Melissa. It would have been easier. Instead, I pictured the little girl who used to run into my garage after school carrying drawings she'd made. Daddy, look what I made. When had that little girl disappeared? Or had I simply stopped noticing? That evening, Frank came over with fishing poles. We're going tomorrow. I don't feel much like fishing. Good. He handed me one rod. Neither do I. So why go? Because sitting in this house won't change anything. We loaded the gear into his truck. As he closed the tailgate, he looked at me. You know what the hardest part is? What? You still want her to call? I didn't answer. Because he was right. Even after everything, some part of me still hoped my phone would ring. That she'd cry. That she'd say, Dad, I messed up. Instead, the next morning, Detective Kim called before 7. Her voice was calm. We're ready. Ready for what? She answered quietly. Tomorrow changes everything. I looked out toward my empty driveway. For the first time since Melissa left, I realized the next chapter wouldn't be about recovering my money. It would be about letting the truth catch up with the people who had run from it. I woke up before dawn because somebody was knocking on my front door. Not pounding, just 3 steady knocks. The kind that immediately tells you whoever's outside isn't selling anything. I glanced at the clock. 5:47 a.m. For a split second, I wondered if I'd imagined it. Then came another 3 knocks. I eased myself out of bed, my knees protesting before my feet even touched the floor. The house felt unusually still. I looked through the front window. 2 police SUVs, an unmarked sedan. My stomach tightened. Even though Detective Rachel Kim had warned me something was happening today, seeing that many vehicles outside your home has a way of making your pulse forget everything you know. I opened the door. Rachel stood on the porch wearing a navy windbreaker with Financial Crimes Unit stitched across the chest. Beside her were 2 uniformed officers and a man carrying several evidence boxes. Good morning, Mr. Dawson. It doesn't feel like one. She gave me a sympathetic smile. I know. Frank pulled into my driveway just as she spoke. He climbed out of his truck carrying 2 coffees. I figured I'd beat you here. Rachel laughed softly. You've got good timing. Frank handed me 1 cup. You eating? Not yet. You should. I don't think I can. He looked toward Rachel. You ready? She nodded. We're here to collect the original documents. Come on in. They worked methodically. Nobody rushed. Nobody tore through the house. Rachel wore white gloves while examining each document. She compared certified copies against electronic records on her laptop. The trustee paperwork, the original trust agreement, property tax statements, Linda's death certificate, my driver's license. Everything was photographed before being placed into evidence folders. One younger officer noticed an old family portrait hanging over the fireplace. You've got a beautiful family. I smiled politely. We used to. He looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. It's all right. Rachel glanced up from the dining room table. This photograph was taken here 20 years ago. Keep it. I wasn't planning on giving it away. She smiled. Good. Around 7:30, I noticed something unusual outside. Mrs. Turner from across the street was standing on her front porch, watching. A minute later, another neighbor came outside. Then another. Within 15 minutes, half the block seemed to have found a reason to collect their mail. Frank looked through the blinds. The neighborhood's awake. They've probably decided I'm a criminal. He snorted. They usually decide before they know anything. He wasn't wrong. Springfield isn't a tiny town, but neighborhoods like mine still function like small communities. People notice unfamiliar cars, especially police cars. Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen inside. It already started. She turned the phone toward us. Someone had uploaded a picture of my house to the local neighborhood Facebook page. 8 police vehicles at Harry Dawson's house this morning. Anybody know what's going on? There weren't 8. There were 3. By the 5th comment, someone claimed I had been arrested for tax fraud. Another guessed domestic violence. One woman wrote, I always thought something seemed off about him. Frank rolled his eyes so hard I thought they'd disappear. People amaze me. I chuckled despite myself. So much imagination. Rachel shook her head. Unfortunately, rumors move faster than facts. Almost 200 miles away, Melissa saw the same post before Rachel ever called her. I didn't know that until much later. Detective Kim told me afterward how the conversation went. Melissa answered on the second ring. Hello, Melissa Carter. Who's asking? Detective Rachel Kim, Missouri Financial Crimes. A pause. Then Melissa laughed. Oh, this is about my dad. Yes, I already saw the Facebook post. Another laugh. I told Jason he'd eventually mess something up. Rachel waited. Melissa continued. So, did he finally get arrested? Rachel answered calmly. No. Silence. We're at your father's home because we need additional evidence. What evidence? The evidence against you. According to Rachel, Melissa didn't speak for almost 10 seconds. Then she whispered, What? Back in Missouri, Rachel's phone rang again. She answered immediately. Kim, her expression changed. Frank noticed it too. What happened? She covered the microphone. Arkansas State Police? My heart skipped. They found the truck. She nodded slowly. I couldn't breathe. Rachel listened for another minute, then thanked the caller and ended the conversation. They located your F-150 outside Little Rock. I closed my eyes. Is it damaged? Doesn't appear to be. What about Jason? They arrested him while he was attempting to transfer ownership. Frank let out a low whistle. That was quick. Rachel nodded. He made several mistakes. Like what? He used fraudulent identification. She opened her notebook. The title didn't match county records. Anything else? She looked directly at me. They found additional documents inside the truck. What kind? Multiple fake IDs. Frank frowned. Just Harry's. Rachel slowly shook her head. No. The room became very quiet. There were identification documents belonging to at least 4 other elderly individuals. I stared at her. 4, possibly more. She folded her notebook. We're now coordinating with investigators in Arkansas, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Frank muttered under his breath. I knew he wasn't an amateur. Around lunchtime, Rachel received another update. Melissa had agreed to meet investigators voluntarily. She still believed she could explain everything. Instead, they showed her document after document. Electronic signatures, login histories, property records, bank transfers, GPS data, phone records. By the end of the interview, she'd stopped talking. Rachel told me later that Melissa asked only one question. Can I call my dad? Rachel had answered honestly. I'll ask him. She looked at me across my dining room table. I'm asking now. I looked toward Linda's favorite rocking chair. It had been empty for 11 years. Sometimes I still caught myself expecting to see her knitting there. What would she have wanted me to do? Forgive? Probably. Protect myself? Definitely. I rubbed the wedding band I still wore. I can't. Rachel nodded. I understand. Tell her. I stopped. What? I swallowed hard. Tell her I need time. Rachel wrote it down exactly as I said it. Nothing more. Nothing less. By late afternoon, the police vehicles were gone. So were most of the neighbors. Only Mrs. Turner remained outside watering flowers that clearly didn't need water. Frank noticed. You want me to go explain things? I laughed. No. Why not? She'll know soon enough. He smiled. Fair point. Before leaving, Rachel handed me her business card. We'll probably need you in court eventually. I'll be there. She hesitated. Mr. Dawson. Yes. I've investigated financial exploitation cases for almost 12 years. And you'd be surprised how many parents still try to protect the child who stole from them. I looked toward the empty driveway where my truck had always been. I almost did. But you didn't. No. She smiled gently. That may have saved more than your retirement. After everyone left, the house felt strangely peaceful. Not because anything had been fixed. Nothing had. My truck was still gone. My daughter was still facing criminal charges. My family was still broken. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't carrying the entire weight of it alone. As the sun began to set, my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. Unknown number. I pressed play. For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then Melissa's voice barely above a whisper. Dad. She started crying. I'm so sorry. The message ended before she said another word. I sat on the porch until dark listening to that voicemail 3 times. Not because I believed everything was suddenly going to be okay, but because after weeks of denial, that was the first time my daughter finally sounded afraid of the truth. The courthouse in Springfield looked exactly the way I remembered. Solid limestone walls, tall columns, flags moving lazily in the July heat. I'd been there before. Jury duty, property taxes, helping Linda change the title on our first house after we finally paid off the mortgage. I never imagined I'd walk through those same doors because of my own daughter. Frank parked beside the courthouse steps and shut off the engine. You ready? No, he nodded. Me neither. We sat there for another minute. Neither of us reached for the door handle. Finally, he smiled. If we keep sitting here, the judge's schedule isn't going to change. I was hoping it might. You've always been optimistic. That made me laugh, even if only for a second. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it was fuller than I expected. A few reporters sat quietly in the back. Several neighbors recognized me. Mrs. Turner looked embarrassed when our eyes met. She walked over before the hearing started. "Harry, it's all right." "No, it isn't." She took a deep breath. "I told people you were probably the one in trouble." "I heard." "I'm ashamed of that." I smiled. "We've all been wrong about people." She looked down. "I owe you an apology." "You just gave me one?" She squeezed my arm before returning to her seat. Frank leaned closer. "That woman has talked more about this case than local television." "I know. At least today she'll have something accurate to talk about." The courtroom doors opened. Melissa entered first. She wasn't wearing the expensive clothes from the pictures I'd seen online. No designer sunglasses, no jewelry, just a plain navy blouse and gray slacks. Her shoulders were slumped. She looked smaller, older. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked like someone who hadn't slept. She saw me immediately. Our eyes met. For just a second, I saw the little girl who used to wave from the school bus window every afternoon. Then the bailiff directed her toward the defense table. Jason came in a few moments later. Even then, he carried himself with confidence. Suit pressed, hair perfect. He smiled at someone in the gallery as if he were attending a business meeting instead of a criminal hearing. That smile disappeared once the prosecutor began speaking. The state started with the financial records. One witness after another explained the evidence. A county recorder described the forged property documents. A bank investigator walked the jury through the electronic transfers. A cybersecurity analyst displayed login records on large monitors. Every transaction, every IP address, every timestamp. The prosecutor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Facts can be louder than anger. Jason's attorney tried to argue that Melissa handled the financial decisions. Melissa's attorney claimed Jason manipulated her. Then Detective Rachel Kim took the stand. She answered every question calmly, clearly, without exaggeration. The prosecutor asked, "Detective Kim, based on your investigation, who initiated the fraudulent property transaction?" Rachel looked toward the jury. "The evidence shows Jason Walker prepared the forged documents." "And who provided access to Mr. Dawson's financial accounts?" Rachel paused. "Melissa Carter knowingly supplied account credentials and personal information." The room became quiet. No dramatic music, no gasps, just silence, because everyone understood exactly what those words meant. After lunch, the prosecutor introduced text messages recovered from cloud backups. One appeared on the courtroom screen. "Melissa, do we really need all of it?" Jason replied. "Jason, if we're doing this, we're doing it once." Another message. "Melissa, Dad's gonna be devastated." Jason answered, "He'll get over it." I looked down at my hands. I didn't want to read anymore. Then came the message that seemed to drain every bit of color from Melissa's face. "Melissa, the old man won't figure it out. Take everything." Nobody spoke, not even Jason. His attorney slowly removed his glasses. The prosecutor simply let the silence sit there. Sometimes silence is stronger than another question. Then it was my turn. The bailiff called my name. I walked to the witness stand carefully, not because I was nervous, because my knees still reminded me every morning that I wasn't young anymore. After taking the oath, I settled into the chair. The prosecutor smiled kindly. "Mr. Dawson, how long did you work as a heavy equipment mechanic?" 43 years. "What did you enjoy most about it?" I wasn't expecting that question. I thought for a moment. "Fixing things." "What kinds of things?" "Engines, bulldozers, excavators." "And why did you enjoy that?" "Because most problems have a cause." He nodded. "And once you find the cause, you can usually fix it." The prosecutor waited, then asked quietly, "Did you believe people work the same way?" I looked toward Melissa. She was staring at the defense table. For a long moment, I couldn't answer. Finally, I said, "I did." "What changed?" I swallowed. "I spent years believing that if I loved my daughter enough, if I kept helping, eventually she'd stop needing to be rescued." The courtroom was completely still. I wasn't protecting her anymore. My voice cracked. I was protecting her from becoming responsible for her own choices. I paused, trying to steady myself. "I spent 40 years repairing broken machines." A faint smile crossed my face. "Turns out engines are easier." Even the judge smiled at that, just briefly. The prosecutor thanked me, then sat down. Cross-examination lasted less than 10 minutes. Jason's attorney suggested I had willingly given Melissa access to my accounts. I did. "So she had your permission to help pay bills. She knew your passwords." "Yes." "So why are we here?" I looked directly at him. "Because I never gave anyone permission to pretend to be me." He nodded once. "No further questions?" Before sentencing, the judge allowed Melissa to speak. She stood slowly, hands trembling. I blamed everyone my whole life. She wiped away tears. My ex-husbands. She took another breath. My mom for dying. Then she looked at me. My dad for always making everything okay. She began crying openly. I convinced myself I deserved what he had. The judge remained silent. Melissa turned toward me. Dad! Her voice barely carried across the courtroom. I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't answer. She nodded as though she'd expected that. Then, almost like a frightened child, she asked the one question I'd been dreading. Did you ever stop loving me? The room disappeared. For a second, it was just the two of us. I remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle, holding her hand at Linda's funeral, waiting outside emergency rooms after each failed marriage. Every memory arrived at once. Finally, I spoke. No, my voice was steady. I never stopped. She closed her eyes. That's why today hurts. Tears rolled down her face. Mine too. The judge sentenced Jason first. Because of his prior convictions and his role in organizing the fraud, he received a lengthy prison sentence, restitution, and additional penalties related to financial crimes in multiple states. Then came Melissa. The judge acknowledged her cooperation after Jason's arrest and the fact that she had no previous felony convictions. Still, the crimes were serious. She received a prison sentence followed by supervised release and was ordered to pay restitution. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't satisfying in the way movies pretend it is. Nobody clapped. Nobody celebrated. A father walked out of a courtroom without his daughter. A daughter walked away in handcuffs, knowing she had put herself there. As deputies led Melissa toward the side door, she turned one last time. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. Some conversations are already finished before either person realizes it. Outside, Frank handed me my truck keys. My truck, he smiled. Recovered yesterday. I stared at the old blue Ford F-150 parked across the street. The sunlight reflected off the hood. For the first time in months, I realized I wasn't walking away with nothing. I was walking away with the truth. And sometimes, that's the only thing worth carrying. Almost a year has passed since that day at the courthouse. People ask if life ever goes back to normal after something like that. The honest answer, no, it becomes different. Different isn't always worse. Sometimes it's simply quieter. I still wake up before sunrise. My knees still complain before the rest of me is fully awake. I still make coffee at 6:15 every morning. The blue mug Linda bought me all those years ago is still sitting in the same cabinet. The crack in the handle hasn't gotten any bigger. Neither has the one in my heart. I've just learned to carry both. After breakfast, I usually walk out to the driveway. The old silver truck never came back exactly the way it left. Insurance covered some repairs after investigators finished with it, but I eventually decided to sell it. Too many memories. Too many fingerprints from a chapter I wanted to close. Instead, I bought another used F-150. Blue this time. Linda's favorite color. Not fancy. Not new. Just dependable. At my age, dependable matters a lot more than impressive. Every Wednesday and Friday, I volunteer at a nonprofit garage on the north side of Springfield. We repair cars for seniors who can't afford labor costs. Most of the mechanics there are retired. Like me, one worked for Ford. Another spent 30 years fixing school buses. We joke that between the four of us, we've forgotten more about engines than most dealerships ever knew. One Wednesday afternoon, an elderly woman brought in a 20-year-old Buick with transmission problems. She apologized 3 times before handing me the keys. I'm embarrassed bringing in something this old. I smiled. Ma'am, half the people working here are older than your car. She laughed so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. Moments like that surprised me. Not because they were funny, because I honestly wasn't sure I'd laugh again after everything that happened. Healing doesn't usually arrive all at once. It sneaks in quietly, one ordinary afternoon at a time. Frank still comes by almost every Saturday. Sometimes we fish, sometimes we don't. Truth is, we spend more time drinking coffee than catching anything. One cool October morning, we sat beside Fellows Lake with our fishing lines in the water. Neither of us had gotten a bite in over an hour. Frank finally looked over. You know what? What? We're terrible fishermen. We've always been terrible. So why do we keep doing it? I looked across the water. Because fish don't ask uncomfortable questions. He laughed. I'll drink to that. We sat quietly for a while. Then Frank asked the question he'd avoided for months. You heard from Melissa? I nodded. A few letters. You answer, not right away. What did she say? The first few mostly asked for forgiveness. And the rest? They asked for money. Frank sighed. That's disappointing. A little. But not surprising. The letters kept coming every few weeks. Some were only a page. Others stretched to 5 or 6. She wrote about prison jobs, counseling classes, books she'd started reading. She apologized over and over. Sometimes I believed her. Sometimes I wasn't sure. One sentence stayed with me. I don't know who I became anymore. I read that line at least 10 times, because I wasn't sure either. One rainy Sunday afternoon, I finally decided to answer. I didn't write much, just a few lines. Then I walked into the hallway closet and opened an old photo box. Inside were hundreds of pictures. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, camping trips, school plays. I eventually found the one I was looking for, Melissa at 5 years old. She was sitting on my shoulders during the county fair, cotton candy all over her face. Linda standing beside us laughing so hard she wasn't looking at the camera. I'd always loved that picture. I made a copy, not the original. Some memories belong at home. On the back of the copy, I wrote one sentence. I still remember this little girl. I hope you find her again. I folded the picture into the letter. Nothing else. No money. No advice. No promises. Just the truth. About a month later, I received another envelope. Inside was only a short note. Dad. I cried for an hour after seeing that picture. Thank you for remembering the part of me I forgot. There wasn't a request for money. There wasn't an excuse. For the first time, there wasn't anyone else to blame. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside Linda's old cedar chest. Not because everything had been fixed. It hadn't. Trust doesn't grow back overnight. Sometimes it never grows back completely. But people can still change. Whether Melissa truly would, only time could answer that. Around Thanksgiving, Detective Rachel Kim stopped by the garage. She'd been in the area and wanted to say hello. She shook my hand. You look different. I lose weight. She smiled. No. You sleep better. I thought about that. I guess I do. She looked around the shop. So this is retirement? I thought retirement meant sitting around. And I got bored. She laughed. I've got good news. What kind? Most of the stolen funds were recovered. I nodded. I heard. The restitution process is moving faster than expected. That's good. She tilted her head. You don't sound very excited. I wiped grease from my hands with an old shop towel. I stopped measuring my life by the money I lost. So what do you measure it by now? I looked across the garage. An older veteran was smiling after hearing his truck finally started. A young volunteer was helping another mechanic organize tools. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the parking lot. Peace, Rachel smiled. I think you've earned some. Christmas arrived with the usual mix of happiness and heartache. Linda's stocking still hung over the fireplace. Mine too. Melissa's stayed packed away in the attic. Not out of anger, out of honesty. Some traditions need time before they can return. That evening, I stood on the back porch holding a cup of coffee. Snowflakes drifted through the porch light. For a moment, I almost heard Linda's voice. Not really. Just memory doing what memory does. She would have been proud that I finally learned something she'd understood years before. You can love someone with your whole heart and still refuse to let them destroy your life. Those two things can exist together. It took me 67 years to understand that. I wish it hadn't taken so long. But I'm grateful I learned it at all. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that setting a boundary isn't the opposite of love. Sometimes it's the strongest form of love we have left. If you've ever had to make a painful choice to protect your own peace, I hope you know you're not alone.